Today's reading again comes from Mark's Gospel. We're reading from chapter 8 and verses 27 to 38. This is Peter's declaration about Jesus and the first time Jesus teaches the disciples about what is about to happen when they go to Jerusalem. So, 27 in chapter 8. Then Jesus and his disciples went away to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Tell me, who do people say I am?" "Some say you are John the Baptist," they answered. "Others that you are Elijah, while others say that you are one of the prophets." "And what about you?" he asked them. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Then Jesus ordered them, "Do not tell anyone about me." Then Jesus began to teach his disciples, "The Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. He will be put to death, but 3 days later he will rise to life." He made this very clear to them. So Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But Jesus turned round, looked at his disciples, and rebuked Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "Your thoughts don't come from God, but from man." Then Jesus called the crowd and his disciples to him. "If anyone wants to come with me," he told them, "he must forget self, carry his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his own life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. Does a person gain anything if he wins the whole world but loses his life? Of course not. There is nothing he can give to regain his life. If a person is ashamed of me and of my teaching in this godless and wicked day, then the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory with the holy angels." So, interesting stuff. Reading behind the text is so important. I used to look at this reading and focus so much on Peter's declaration as a moment of great joy, a moment when the disciples, if you like, had finally got it. But actually, if you read some more, and you notice the way that Mark has used his material to construct a consistent and repeated dialogue, you find that in fact it isn't like that at all. The focus isn't really on Peter at all. Because what's happened in the last few chapters is we've had, of course, those two nature miracles of Jesus feeding the 5,000 and walking on the water, healing the sick. So we get miracle, healing, and then we get an engagement with the religious leaders of the day. So in chapter 7, it's those who come along and talk to Jesus about how his disciples aren't washing their hands properly, and we get into that discussion about the teaching of the ancestors, the oral tradition on top of the books that we call in the Old Testament the first five, the Pentateuch. So that's the pattern: nature miracle, healing miracle, conversation with the religious authorities. And then we have the same thing is repeated in chapter 8, which we didn't read, of course, and in fact in our lectionary we've skipped. Because last week we were dealing with the healing miracle of the man who was both deaf and mute. But in between that, what we haven't heard is that Jesus has fed 4,000 people. And then he has had a run-in with the religious authorities again. And when he was talking just before, and then there's a healing of a man. So he was talking with the disciples in the boat, and they got terribly confused about when he said, "Take care, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod." And they thought he was talking about the fact they'd only brought one loaf with them. And Jesus says, "Are your minds so dull? You have eyes and can't see. You have ears. Can't you understand? Don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000 people? How many baskets full of leftover pieces did I take up?" 12, they answered. "And when I broke 7 loaves for the 4,000 people, how many baskets of leftovers did you take up?" 7, they answered. "And still you don't understand?" Jesus said to them. And then there's a healing miracle where Jesus restores the sight of a man who is blind, but it takes 2 goes to do it. And initially the man can only see hazily, and then he can see properly. And you see what Mark is doing. He's using this material to talk about how people gradually come into an awareness about their blindness, about what they can and can't see. So when Jesus asks the disciples, "And who do you say I am?" For me previously, if you like, focusing on that, a moment of pivotal importance, a moment when the universe holds its breath, and finally, the disciples have got it. Well, actually, they haven't. Because who do you say I am? You are the Messiah, they say. The Jewish Messiah. The word is the Jewish Messiah. The one who is going to come and restore Israel as the one nation, to drive out in a militaristic way all the occupying forces, to restore Israel to its greatness and glory. And notice, Jesus doesn't say, "That's fantastic." Now, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says in this event, when Peter makes his declaration, "Good for you, Simon, son of John, for this truth did not come to you from any human being, but was given to you directly by my Father in heaven." So you get that sense of, yeah, okay, this revelation came to you because of God's grace and because of God's insight. You know, yes, you finally got something. But in Mark's Gospel, it isn't like that. He says, "Don't tell anyone about me." And he then goes on to describe himself as the Son of Man, not the Messiah. So Peter is saying, "You're the Messiah," with all those connotations of, "Oh, and we know what you're about to do." And Jesus says, "Don't tell anyone about me," in that sense. And then he starts to teach them about what's going to happen. And Peter, of course, because he loves Jesus and doesn't want it to happen, says that no, that can't be the way that things are going to be. And again, you see, Jesus basically makes the point, well, you are looking at the things that have happened, and you're using your own lens and your own expectations and your own ideas about how God's plan is going to be, and you're getting annoyed with me for the fact that that's what it is going to be. Have you learnt nothing yet? That actually God has a plan, and that in Jesus coming, in God coming in human form in Jesus, there is something unfolding here which is so much bigger than any one person's aspiration, than any one person's expectation, disappointment, or anything like that at all. Have you not noticed that you're in the presence of something extraordinary? That your own logic, that your own reason, that your own sense of what is right or wrong, that your own desires for what might be a good thing to happen should be completely and utterly shelved, because you are in the presence of God. And so if God says this is going to happen, it's going to happen. And so Jesus says, if anyone wants to come with me, if anyone wants to be a disciple, if anyone claims to understand what is going on here, they must forget themselves, which is very analogous to the Great Commandment of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, and loving your neighbour as yourself. This is all about outward looking. This is all about forgetting self. And that's exactly what Jesus says here. Carry your cross, because in forgetting yourself, there is challenge, there is danger, there is risk, there is hardship. Because clearly, forgetting yourself means not doing the things that would bring you calm and comfort and peace in a normal worldview sense. You know, you'd sooner be putting your feet up and watching a film than going out on the streets and helping people who have nowhere to go. You'd sooner be doing something that brings you pleasure than spending time with somebody else who maybe you don't particularly get alongside and listening to their problems. You'd sooner be eating lots of lovely food yourself rather than giving your money to somebody else. Of course you would. That's how we're made. That's how the world thinks. But to forget oneself and carry one's cross is to put God's needs and other people's needs before ourselves. And that is monumentally difficult and an incredible calling. We know that if we are able to, even for a moment, barely scratch the surface of responding like that, then great things happen, and the kingdom of heaven is made that way here on earth, where people see through our actions that we think they're important because we know God loves everybody. And this is what the calling is about. If anyone wants to come with me, he must forget himself, carry his or her cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his own life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for me and the gospel will save it. If one can abandon oneself to God's care, then there is peace and contentment and joy and a knowledge that we're taking part in life's greatest adventure, to go beyond the normal, to step outside of our physical frame and recognize that we are in the midst of a wonderful, glorious, complex creation where all the benefits and all the joys it can offer are for all people, and we stand against anything that separates and divides and oppresses and hurts. We are for love and unity and the kingdom of heaven here on earth.